YouTube. Okay, Mayor, we are live.
Okay, very good. And welcome to the Monday, March 30th special meeting of the Livermore City Council. I now call the meeting to order. Okay, I've asked for a roll call, please.
Councilmember Monroe. Councilmember Monroe.
Unmuting, sorry, I'm here.
Councilmember Coomer.
Here.
Councilmember Carling.
Here.
Vice Mayor Warner.
Here.
And Mayor Marchand.
I'm here. Very good. Well, thank you very much. Looks like everybody's here. We have an opportunity for the public to address the City Council regarding the special meeting agenda. Tonight, we're going to have an opportunity for the public comment that'll be provided before each item. Well, it'll be after each item is introduced, but before the staff report. Members of the public may submit one comment per item, no more than 500 words, or they can include all their comment for each item so that they can post if they wish to have it read onto the record. Please be aware, if more than one comment is submitted by a single person for a single item, only the last comment submitted during the public comment period for that item will be read into the record. However, the remaining comments will be provided to the City Council and will be part of the official record. The public comment period for each item closes at the conclusion of the clerk reading the comments received, and no additional comments will be read after that item. But as I said, they will be submitted to the council. Comments may also be submitted during or using YouTube or the question and answer portion. Zoom comments submitted, or still getting used to this, using YouTube or the question and answer period of Zoom. Comments submitted to the city clerk before 12 o'clock today will be read into the record. Anything received after 12 p.m. will be provided to the City Council after the meeting. Those were ones submitted using YouTube. When submitting public comment, please include the item number at the beginning of the post. So we have 3 items tonight. 3.01, which is the canvass of the votes. 3.02, which is the resolution appropriating funds for the permanent maintenance and release of security. And also the 3.03 is the update from staff and discussion and direction regarding city operations during the COVID-19 emergency. So with that, we're going to go into the special meeting items. 3.01, this is the canvass of the votes for the March 3rd, 2020 presidential primary election, the canvass of votes and ordinance acknowledging the voter approval of ordinance number 2089. And I'll hand this off to the city clerk.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I am Marie Weber, your city clerk. Tonight, you are being asked to adopt a resolution accepting the canvass of votes submitted to the city for certification by the Alameda County Registrar of Voters Office and adopt an ordinance acknowledging voter approval of ordinance 2089, approving a development agreement with 2205 Railroad Avenue LLC for the Wine Country Hotel at the Bankhead project. City Council originally adopted ordinance 2089 at the regular City Council meeting of July 29, 2019. The city clerk then received a referendum petition seeking to repeal the ordinance on August 28, 2019. Upon certification of signatures by Alameda County Registrar of Voters, the City Council called for and gave notice of a special municipal election and requested the election, to be held on March 3, 2020, be consolidated with the county. The Alameda County Registrar of Voters consolidated the election and designated the measure as Measure P, which was voted on at the statewide presidential primary election conducted in the city of Livermore on March 3, 2020. The Alameda County Registrar of Voters certified the results of the election on March 4, 2020. Measure P received 19,546 yes votes, 9,941 no votes, with a 54.89% voter turnout. With the passage of Measure P, the ordinance was approved by voters, the stay was lifted, and it became effective by operation of law. With that, I'm available for questions.
Any questions for the city clerk?
Yeah, this is Bob Carling. I have one. What was the financial cost of the city? Do you know?
I haven't yet received an invoice from the county.
All right, thanks.
Ms. Weber, were there any comments from the public at this for this item?
I don't see any comments at this time.
Okay, very good. Thank you. So there were none. I think one of the things that was important about this referendum was that when people were asked to sign the petition, they were being told it was about a larger park. It was about a park in the downtown. And as I'd mentioned at a previous meeting, in the entire 58 pages of the referendum, the word park was not mentioned once. And I think the public came to realize that this was not about a park, that it really was about a hotel. And this was a development agreement for a hotel in the downtown, where the vast majority of the participants in the downtown outreach wanted the hotel, and that was on South Livermore Avenue. I think the results of the election bear that out, that this is in fact where the community wants the hotel, on South Livermore.
So I'll move the resolution.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Vice Mayor Warner, seconded by Councilmember Monroe. Any discussion on the motion? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Monroe?
Yes. Hi,
Councilmember
whatever.
Coomer? Councilmember Coomer?
Aye.
Councilmember Carling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Warner?
Aye.
Mayor Marchand?
Aye. So that passed unanimously. Very good. Thank you very much. Moving on to 3.02. This is the appropriation of funds and acceptance for permanent maintenance and release of security for the Livermore Village infrastructure known as Livermore Village East-West Road. I think that's known to most of us as Veterans Way.
Honorable Mayor, this is Mark Roberts, your city manager. And at this point, I'm going to call on your city engineer, Sherry Sheets, to just give us a quick overview of what this item does.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. My name is Sherry Sheets, your city engineer. On October 8th, 2018, the City Council awarded a contract to Gelati Construction to build the Livermore Village East-West Road, now referred to as Veterans Way. The project was for a approximately 800-foot-long street connecting South Livermore to L Street, which bisected the Livermore Village site. The work included sewer system, storm drain upgrades, electrical services, parking, lighting, landscaping, and pavement services. The total project cost was approximately $4.7 million, with $3,445,000 of construction for the construction contract. Due to the bad weather, the project slipped into fiscal year 1920, and therefore staff is asking council to authorize $700,000 in unspent general funds from fiscal year 1819 to be appropriated to this project for fiscal year 1920. Staff's recommendation is also that you accept the project for permanent maintenance and release the security bonds for the project. That's concludes our presentation, and staff's available for questions.
Any questions for staff at this point? Okay, do we have any?
It's this century, right?
Pardon me?
It's this century, not 1920, 2020, right?
Right, yeah. So a couple of questions. First off, to the city clerk, do we have any comment requests on this item?
No, we do not.
Okay, one question I've got. There is there's a November initiative coming up that rezones a significant portion of the downtown. in order to implement the intent of that initiative, would it require moving this Veterans Way?
Honorable Mayor, this is your city manager, Mark Roberts. Yes, to fully implement all portions of the initiative on that site, the roadway would need to be relocated to the south.
Wow. Okay. And of course, we have no additional funds to move a street like that. And during the COVID crisis, I think we're actually seeing our revenues drop. So with that, it'd be an additional expense. And I personally see no value to the community to move a street now that we've just completed the construction and approved the appropriation of funds for its completion. Any other comments from the council?
I just
No.
wanted to,
I was just gonna make a motion to approve staff recommendation.
well, I'll go ahead and second this one too.
Okay, motion by Councilmember Carling, seconded by Councilmember Monroe. Any discussion on the motion?
I did have a comment, just
Okay.
to say how much pleasure over the last, I don't know, 6 months or so, it gives me to drive that road. It is such an improvement. So,
With the
Thanks.
additional parking too.
you know,
Even better.
that too, but mostly it's just, that's a beautiful little road and it really is a great addition to downtown.
And it's a great acknowledgement of the contributions of our veterans to the community of Livermore. All right, any further discussion?
Yeah, I would just say that I find it a pleasure to drive too, probably wasting a lot of gas just going up and down it.
All right, well, very good. There being no further discussion, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Oh, I'm sorry, roll call, please.
Councilmember Monroe,
Aye.
Councilmember Coomer,
Aye.
Councilmember Carling,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Warner,
Aye.
Mayor Marchand.
Aye. All right, well, very good. Well, thank you very much. On to 3.03, and this is discussion. Oh, I'm sorry.
I apologize. We just needed some clarity on item 3.01, that the motion and vote was for both the resolution and the ordinance.
I believe that was the intent of the maker of the motion. Just to
Yes.
backtrack, that was for the vice mayor?
Yes.
That was the intent.
Excellent, thank you.
Very good.
And of the person who seconded it as well, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay, now on to item 3.03. This is an update from the staff and discussion and direction regarding city operations during the COVID-19 emergency. Is there any public comment?
No, there's not.
Okay, with that, I will turn it over to staff for the update and see if there's any additional direction from the council. Thank you.
Good evening again, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. I'm Mark Roberts. I am your city manager and your director of emergency operations during this local emergency. As you will remember, under the authority under the government code and the municipal code, on March 13th, I declared a local emergency for the city of Livermore. And on March 16th, you, sitting as the city council, adopted a resolution ratifying that proclamation of existence of a local emergency. Since that time, we have been busy consistently both addressing issues related to the emergency as well as carrying on limited daily operations. So I wanted to start by just giving a very, very quick snapshot of where we stood as of this morning. As of this morning at the national level, there have been 155,705 cases of the COVID virus confirmed. In California, that number is just about 6,300 cases. In the Bay Area, we have just over 2,000 cases confirmed. And in Alameda County, we currently have 256. Of course, all of these numbers, according to experts, may be significantly below the actual number of cases that exist, because we are still in many places, including the Bay Area, doing testing on a limited basis when folks present symptoms and meet certain criteria. But you can see from the scale of those numbers and their change over time, we certainly have a task ahead of us as a local agency. Just to give you a sense of how big that increase is, in the United States, the difference between what happened on Friday, 3/27, and Monday, 3:30 in the morning was an increase of 55,000 cases. So we are still very much on the upward trajectory nationwide, within the state, and within the Bay Area. So that is what's informing your staff's work on this. Since the last time you were together, the city has continued all of its essential operations. All locations now where the city has offices are closed to walk-in traffic. And they are, however, open during normal business hours for phone interactions and essentially computer interactions. That actually has been well understood by the community, and the operations are proceeding smoothly across all areas of the city. As we talked about last time, your emergency operations staff, especially your police department, has modified their operations and gone to 2 operational periods. And they have placed additional resources on the street, especially as we've transitioned through this initial time of making sure that businesses are ultimately respecting the shelter in place and the essential operations directives of the county and of the state, and essentially to provide information to folks as they have had questions about the implementation of this. During the last 7 days, you have authorized me as your Director of Emergency Operations to enact orders, and I have enacted 2 orders. The first of which, on March 25th, I issued an order establishing a temporary moratorium on residential and commercial evictions for tenants that demonstrate an inability to pay rent due to or arising out of a substantial decrease in household or business income or substantial out-of-pocket medical expense, either of which was caused by the COVID-19 pandemic or by any local, state, or federal government response to COVID-19. That proclamation applied to both residential and commercial tenants, and essentially is one piece of a much larger plan that we are working with many partners to implement. In addition to that proclamation, today I enacted a proclamation that established a temporary moratorium on the imposition of City of Livermore fines, penalties, and interest imposed for the failure of timely payment of the city's transit occupancy taxes, business license taxes, or to pay invoices from the city for water or sewer utility services as a result of the loss of income related to COVID-19. These 2 items are direct actions that the city has within its power to take to deal with the tremendous financial stress and tremendous change that's going on out in the community. There are some areas where our local government does not have the authority to impose or create a solution. And in those cases, we're working with our partners at the state, regional, or even the local level to move forward those. Examples of that include Governor Newsom's work with major lenders throughout the state who have committed to essentially allowing additional time for mortgage payments and other items related to the ownership of property to provide flexibility for payment, waiving fines, penalties, and interests, and other items, so that those impacted, the other half of the landlords, essentially, that are impacted by tenants who cannot pay, can seek some relief. In addition, the state and federal government continue to make resources and information available for individuals, businesses, and groups to apply for financial aid to help make it through this crisis. And we continue to put that information out on our website and work with our partner agencies to put that information out before the public. In addition to the 2 proclamations I signed a master agreement for mutual aid for water and wastewater staff. This master agreement is part of the mutual aid agreement that the Tri-Valley Intergovernmental Reciprocal Services Master Agreement assumed. Essentially, this allows the Tri-Valley cities and Zone 7 and DSRSD to work together either in normal times or in an emergency to provide services to each other to ultimately save ratepayers and taxpayers money, deliver services more efficiently, or to provide services in time of disaster. I signed this agreement, which allows us to share staff with those agencies I just mentioned. Should any of those agencies have a shortage of critical staff due to illness or related activities of the COVID-19 crisis. We continue at your direction to put out messaging and social media posts to update our website. We've got about twice as many folks working on messaging in the organization as we would on a typical day, overall spending about twice as much time as they normally would. So we're doing more posts, more outreach, and more coordination to try and get all of those various resources and information in one place on our website, pointing people to where they can find accurate and reliable information. In addition, at the last council meeting, you all directed staff to work with you to begin to put letters out to the community, actually to do a 3-pronged approach. The first was a letter from each of the council members to the community. The second is going to be essentially video posts, which we will record. And the third of which is hosting essentially experts that can do question and answer or put other information out into the community, especially as our crisis continues. The first phase of that is well underway with 2 letters being complete, a letter from the mayor to the community and a letter from the vice mayor in cooperation with Livermore Downtown Incorporated and the Chamber of Commerce to put information that is reliable out. So the 3 essentially agencies, a city, LDI, and the chamber worked together, and the vice mayor put that letter out in addition to the letter the mayor put out. We're in process in the remainder of those letters, and we expect to get those out over the next week or so. And then we will begin to work on both video and the experts being able to perhaps have some version of a call-in. We're still working on exactly the technology for that and how we can make that most useful to the entire community. With that, that's sort of a quick overview of what we have done during the past week and what we are planning to do in the coming week. I'm certainly available for any questions you have.
This is Bob Warner.
Questions for staff?
Bob Warner, I've got a few.
Go ahead.
Okay. Vice Mayor?
Okay, one. All right, a couple of, there are 4. One is, could you speak about the increased or security for the businesses that are closed, and especially downtown? What are we doing in that regard?
Yes, actually, as I briefly touched on, our police department has actually consolidated its operations into 2 shifts. And what that means is, for example, our specialty officers, for example, we normally have school resource officers. We normally have special units. Those folks have been pulled back and put onto patrol. So we actually have a significant number of additional officers out in the community. In addition to that, we are specifically paying attention to businesses that either are closed completely or have much shorter business hours than they would normally because of the pandemic. That is concentrated not only in downtown, but throughout all of our commercial areas and our industrial and office areas as well. And in fact, the resulting activity during the past week, it has been extremely quiet. I mean, actually much quieter than it has been normally. So not only have we not seen an increase in crime, one outcome of this is there's been a lot less of the very low level normal background things that happen from a day-to-day perspective. So I think that's a good outcome, and that I think is a relationship of decreased activity on the public's part and increased activity on our police department's part.
Okay, thank you. The second question, you had mentioned, not or eliminating late fees on various things that within the control of the city. What about deferment of the payments themselves? So you've got, restaurants and others that aren't using the sewer so much, but I do understand that some of the costs are fixed costs. And so is there any consideration with respect to the basic fees themselves and giving people more time to pay them?
So yes, the concept behind waiving the late fees was to allow businesses to not have to pay on the due date. And we would encourage them to contact the city offices to work out a payment plan. Ultimately, those payments have to be made, but exactly what the schedule is on that can be worked out on an individual type basis, where there are a couple of different payment plans that we have, depending on whether you're residential or commercial. And those items can then be agreed to, and then you can pay that obligation off over a period of time. It won't, if you have a payment plan, those payment won't all be due in some cases right at the end of the pandemic crisis.
So as a follow-up to that is that we've got, most of the costs are fixed costs, but some are variable. And to the extent that some variable costs are not incurred by us, would we then pass them on?
Yeah, the
Those
most
payments?
obvious, absolutely. The most obvious of that is if a business shuts down and is not using water, they'll still have their meter charge, which is a relatively modest amount, but essentially they will not have a corresponding, water charge. So that's the most obvious one. Clearly, another one is the transit occupancy taxes. They won't be collected on rooms that are not rented. So most of those, there's just going to be a much lower amount of money that has to be remitted ultimately. But even that, we understand, having all of those things due all at a particular moment in time can create some hardship. And so that's why we have the ability, as we would, in other cases, to work out a payment plan. So that ultimately the city collects what's necessary for us to be fair to all of the ratepayers, but we do it in a way that allows more time.
Great. Now, the third question of the four is that we have our own ordinance that we put in place with respect to evictions, and then there's the state, and then I think you'd mentioned at one point the county was getting into it as well. When will we see how they all line up, and is our intent to make sure that we're consistent with everybody else?
So I'm going to take the first answer at that, Vice Mayor, and then I'm going to invite your city attorney to weigh in on this. But yes, the first thing we are going to do is run through an analysis of all of the ordinances that are in effect. Now, some of them are a little different from each other because our local ordinance covers both commercial tenants as well as residential tenants. It's possible that the others will not ultimately. So yes, what will happen is at your next council meeting, which we expect to be on April 13th, we will be bringing back an ordinance for council consideration. At that time, the staff report there will both explain the various ordinances and explain why the local ordinance that we're recommending does one of a couple of things: aligns where there's only very minor differences, or is very clear where it is different. For example, if the local ordinance gives additional protections that maybe don't come from the state or regional ordinance. Jason, do you want to sort of follow up on that?
This is your city attorney, Jason Alcala. Mark, that was a great summary. First, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Very good, very good. Mark, thank you for the very thorough and comprehensive analysis. Yes, this is your city attorney, Jason Alcala, and yes, we are engaged in that process right now. We are evaluating both the state's order as well as our own order, and also the draft version of the order that's going to the County Board of Supervisors tomorrow, and we will evaluate which is the most restrictive to make sure we take the benefit of all these orders and have some clear guidance to the community. One of our attorneys, our Assistant City Attorney Kelly Trujillo, is currently working on that project.
Okay, thank you. So the last question, and I'll let the others go, is when do we anticipate restarting the Planning Commission? It's my belief that most of what has to go through the Planning Commission and City Council for approvals can be done paperless. So that I would think that this kind of meeting could also work for the Planning Commission. I was just wondering what our thoughts are as to when we could restart.
So, Vice Mayor, this is your city manager in emergency, Mark Roberts. So we are currently working on a date. Our draft date at this particular point, but it is very much subject to movement, is the first meeting in May. And you are correct. Virtually all of the submittals are done or converted into electronic format. So I think this sort of a meeting format can work. As you might imagine, this is a totally new set of challenges and technologies that we are using for your meeting this evening. We want to have a chance to have you go through another one of these meetings that actually has a slightly larger agenda. And then we will need to go through the process of training and dealing with all of the noticing and other things that come with what's going on at the Planning Commission. We do not expect at this point to restart any of our other commissions or committees virtually, simply due to the fact that there are a lot of technologies we would need to do and staff impacts to ultimately set up the virtual meeting. So at this point, our first virtual meeting we're expecting to have with the Planning Commission would be that first meeting in May, and then it would transition back to a regular meeting, that is one that was not streamed or televised, once that it's safe to do so.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Very good. Thank you. Comments from the rest of the council?
Yeah, hey, Bob Coomber here, Mark. I was wondering if we have any idea yet just how much the shutdowns of the businesses around town has impacted the city's revenues at this point.
Expect that there will be an impact. And the first item, which of course will be impacted, is our sales tax revenue. So beyond that, obvious things like our transit occupancy tax, items related to development projects, fee for service, and a variety of things. At this, we're 2.5 weeks in, the impacts have not been severe yet, but that will really depend on the length of the shutdown and then the depth or difficulty that the local economy has moving back into full mode. So we have a May budget workshop scheduled for with all of you. And if we are still in virtual meetings at that point, that will be streamed in the same way that this meeting is being streamed. And by then we expect to have a better, but certainly not perfect idea of where we're going. So from that perspective, we know we have an impact. At this point, it's modest, and the longer this goes and the deeper it goes, the more significant that could become. So we'll know more, and we obviously, as you might imagine, it's near the top of the list for some of my executive team in particular. So we're keeping a very close eye.
Thank you. It kind of just goes to, I sure hope that the people who organized the initiative for November take this under advisement that we don't need any additional costs to the city budget right now. I think we are stressed as it is right now, and perhaps more so if this continues much longer.
Thank you, Councilmember Coomber. Councilmember Monroe?
I have a couple of questions. So first of all, thank you, continued thanks for all the work that you're doing. I recognize how much of a heavy lift this is. Hopefully getting to be less so going forward. I'm curious to know what we're seeing with regard to compliance with shelter in place. So I've got a couple of questions. That's the first one.
So I'll give a quick answer with that, and I believe Police Chief is available. So I'm going to do a quick intro. But generally, given the fact that there are more than 91,000 of us in the community, overall, we're doing pretty well. Chief Harris, do you want to sort of add a little more specificity?
Yeah, this is Chief Harris. Overall, I'd say we're doing really well with community response. We have not had to take any action as like an arrest or anything like that at this point. There are, as you can imagine, a lot of calls of concern for gatherings in parks and activities such as that. We're still in the mode of educating and requesting voluntary compliance, and people up to this point have been very open to that. So there's also continues to be, although less than when we started, calls regarding essential businesses operating, and so we continue to go to those type of calls and work through, whether it's appropriate for the particular business to be open, and also take that opportunity, even if they are appropriate to be open, to discuss proper social distancing.
So that leads to the second question, which is around the essential versus the non-essential businesses. How can residents think about those two? If they see a business open, how can they think about essential versus non-essential?
Well, there's a couple ways to do that. The first of which is if it provides something that's essential to daily living, such as food or fuel, or even a hardware store to deal with repairs and other items. If it is a service that's necessary to preserve the home or the value of it, or to remove a danger or a hazard. Those things are all essential. In addition, certain large-scale operations that deal with our major industries, whether they be food or transportation or safety and security. Obviously, folks that wouldn't traditionally be considered an essential service during a traditional disaster are at the very top of the list. Waxies, that deals with sanitizing products and similar items, cleaning services, is an essential service in the community. So that's the great big guiding principles. Then beyond that, on the city's website, there's county order, and so if people sort of are just wanted to get a little more information, and of course, what a lot of people do, as the chief noted, is call either with questions, comments, or direction on that, and our non-emergency dispatch center. Ultimately, if that's not an obvious one to the folks who are doing the dispatch, we go out and check on that. But essentially, the determination and what's decided of as essential or non-essential comes from the county's order or the governor's order to begin with, and then interpretation of that as we move forward.
And a final question, and this is sort of a follow-up to Planning Commission, but that is that we were, as this was getting going, starting a bunch of new projects, including climate action plan, ongoing wonderful plans. Is there a way to think about those taking place? How many of those can be delayed? What are the effects of the delay? And specifically, I guess I'm thinking about climate action plan now, but downtown as well. Is there a way to think about that, or do we just not have enough information yet?
So 2 answers to that question. For some of those projects, programs, and other policies that the city council has directed us to accomplish, there's normally a lot of analysis and staff work that's necessary before those projects are, for example, ready for a planning commission hearing, or ready to take out to a community workshop, or ready to be sent to an advisory body. So some of that analysis and other things can be done from a remote setting, and those projects are moving forward. Other items that ultimately isn't possible. I believe a couple of the items that you mentioned are in our community development department. Paul Spence, our community development director, he's here at the meeting, and I'm going to ask Paul to say just a few words about the kinds of things that are continuing to move forward, and the kinds of things that are just being delayed because it's not possible to do work on those.
This is Paul Spence, and so yes, Mark's exactly right. We are working. A number of your staff members are working from home. They have access to files and research. A number of our consultants that we're working with are also working from home. And so we have the ability to do research and analysis, look at global data, look at our local data. And so we are moving forward on things like the Climate Action Plan. Some of those plans and programs, though, had anticipated significant community outreach. And so depending on how long we're in this situation, if we do want to move forward, we would have to think about really changing how that outreach occurs. Some of it we could do, we had planned to do some of it on the web, and so we certainly can be working on some of the web-based materials, but quite a bit of it we had anticipated being out at farmers markets or activities or other events. So we'll be looking to see how things move forward, and we certainly do have the possibility of switching gears on some of that and beginning to get community outreach in other ways in the future. But for the time being, your staff is actively occupied in doing what they can to initiate programs and projects with background research and analysis.
And I actually have one more question that this is one that I see keep coming up, which is, golly, we, whoever we is happens to be asking the question, want to know how many cases of COVID-19 there are in the city. My response to that has been, well, we know at the county level, we understand why it's at the county level. I'm wondering if you could just address that one more time.
So they want to know, well, what is the details, in my city, in my neighborhood, on my block? Can I get information to know whether my neighbor is sick? And the answer is no. That information is not available in the state of California. Essentially, the information is put out by health agency, and that's almost always a county. Now, there are a few very notable exceptions. The city of Berkeley has its own health agency. So they essentially give numbers, their agency, which just happens to be the city of Berkeley. Of course, the city of San Francisco also happens to be a county. So in those two cases, citywide information is being developed. But in the rest of the Bay Area, that information is available at the county level. As I noted earlier, countywide, we have 256 confirmed cases. Well, there are 13 cities in Alameda County. So I think it's safe, and we should all act as if the virus is active throughout the county. I think that's a pretty safe assumption without any detailed geographic data. We should run our daily lives that we would as if the were active within our general area. So I think that's the main. We don't have more or even in some cases city by city information. But with the scale of the cases here in the county, and also with the scale of the increase in cases within the county, we do want to make are taking appropriate actions to keep themselves, their loved ones, and the community safe.
I think the thing to remember is, again, we get that question a lot. How many positive cases are there? It really is irrelevant because people's behaviors should stay the same. People should acknowledge the shelter in place, avoid any unnecessary travel, wash their hands frequently, and avoid social distancing. But we really need to maintain those behaviors regardless of what those numbers are. And as the city manager pointed out, we do not have those numbers, but we do know that there are positives. At least there's one positive that we know of in Livermore. But regardless, people need to understand that their behaviors should remain the same if we're going to bend this curve. Any additional comments?
Thank you.
And another point that I think is a question I've gotten a lot of is the city should move to shut down parks because people are not maintaining the social distancing in parks. And people confuse the city of Livermore with the Livermore Area Recreation and Park District. That's a separate elected agency, and they've got their own autonomous board. So the city doesn't maintain and operate parks. So we just can't go in and shut these down. It's a separate agency. And again, back to the point with the essential businesses, I think it's remarkable businesses like Sutherland Distilleries, which depending on your perspective may or may not be essential, but what they're doing now is they're taking their Zyn gin base and using that to make hand sanitizer. So they've made this pivot to create something that's now absolutely essential, and that's hand sanitizer, taking their some of their resources that they have on hand and using something, now making something that's very, very essential to our community.
I would like to add one more thing along those lines. Our state representatives, Senator Glazer, Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Kahan, have been hosting online informational sessions. I think I mentioned those last week. The one on how to think about the mental health issues, one of the things was specifically addressed there was that people don't like uncertainty. We really, really want to know what's going on. It gives us comfort. It gives us a sense of control, even when we don't have it. And at this time, there's a lot of uncertainty. There will continue to be a lot of uncertainty. Knowing the numbers, so Mayor, what you said about doesn't actually matter. Our behavior needs to be the same regardless is absolutely right. Whether we know those numbers might make us feel better, but it doesn't actually change a situation which continues to be very uncertain.
Agreed. Good points. Additional comments from the council. Councilmember Carling?
Yes, thank you, John. I just wanted to make a comment that Councilmember Monroe and I had a phone conference call earlier regarding homelessness with some of the staff, and I just wanted to let the other members of council, as well as those on YouTube or attending at this meeting from the public that the city is still continuing to deal with the homelessness issue, and this particularly troubling for some of those folks in this particular pandemic era. And so we have some staff that are continuing to work full time on trying to deal with some of the folks that are most fragile out there. So Councilmember Monroe and I will be preparing a letter that will go out to the public here regarding what we're doing with in that regard. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank the staff for helping us understand what progress we're making and how we're dealing with those folks during this pandemic. So thanks very much.
Just to elaborate a little bit, there was a piece in the Times recently that showed that Governor Newsom had released $100 million to provide assistance for the homeless, specifically related to COVID-19. And they allocated $1.4 million to Alameda County. That works out to about $175 per unsheltered individual in our county. So $175 when the best guesstimates are about $28,000 to provide a shelter bed for a year. We see there's a great disparity in the resources that are being made available and the actual needs. So I applaud Councilmember Carling and Monroe for the great work that you're doing. This is a huge effort. It's a big effort that's going to require a lot of cooperation from a lot of different agencies. So thank you for your work on this. Moving
Our
on.
pleasure. Thanks.
So any additional comments from the council at this point?
It's Bob Warner. I have one. If I could build on what Councilmember Coombs said earlier, that we definitely don't need to waste any resources on further initiative nonsense. But I would like to also comment on what City Manager Mark Roberts said, is that my guess, and Mark, you can weigh in on it, is that because the city has been very fiscally conservative, that we can weather this storm. But there are other cities out there that haven't been so fiscally conservative that I think could be in trouble. But I just want to let people know that we'll be able to weather this. It could hurt, but we're not going to be anywhere near the level of some cities' desperation, that might be facing bankruptcy.
Councilmember, or excuse me,
The city has
City Manager?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Is correct. Over the past 10 years, the City Council has worked with your executive staff to put in place a number of significant items. So we are actually in very strong financial administrator here, and in noting some of those policies and essentially how we actually are in a relatively strong position compared to other communities to deal with interruption in our.
Okay. Any further comments from the city manager? Oh, okay, very good. Let's see. I believe. Are you still talking? You dropped out.
Can you hear me now, Honorable Mayor?
There we go. Okay.
All right. I'm not sure why I'm having so much trouble here. But essentially, as the Vice Mayor is correct, we do have a number of policies in place, including your reserves, which are fully funded and have sized the organization very appropriately. And we are well positioned versus many communities in the state to deal with this sort of a downturn. We certainly never look forward to this, but we are well prepared.
All right, very good. Thank you. I believe we have a question that just came in. Hand it over to the city clerk.
We actually received two. The first is, does the city have masks and gloves available for residents? And the second is, being able to participate in council meetings via YouTube is awesome. What sort of financial impact is the city expecting as a result of this emergency? Seems like this might kick off a recession.
Okay, let me hand that off to the our emergency operations director, the city manager.
So at this particular time, cities and the county are concentrating on making sure that our first responders and medical providers have all of the resources that they need to fight the pandemic. We do not have a program of providing protective gear to individual residents at this point, and we would point you to the normal places and some of the new ones, such as you noted, Sutherland Distillery, dealing with creating alcohol that's appropriate to be used in disinfectants. So our priority has been essentially making sure that those that take care of us all are well prepared as we move through this. And I would expect as this goes on, production will catch up over time, and we hope that those things like gloves and masks and other items are more available. But at this particular time, as you've heard at the federal and the state level, we'd like to concentrate those resources on those who absolutely, to carry out their daily activities and do what they're supposed to do for us, need those resources. And the second item we just talked about is we are expecting a multi-million-dollar impact to our revenues. At this point, we're well positioned to deal with that. But we don't have the details. We'll know much more sort of in the next 60 days or so, and then further as this plays out further into the future.
With that, I'd like to acknowledge the question about the masks. We actually received a donation from the vice mayor of the city of Danville, Newell Arnrich, the American Tao Chu Foundation, and Cindy Kui from the Launching Pad in San Ramon, and Louis Lam from the American Chinese community of San Ramon donated 500 masks to our first responders here in Livermore. I received that last Friday, so it's very, very kind of them, and it just shows the wonderful interagency cooperation that we have here in the Tri-Valley. Okay, back to the city manager or to the city clerk. Any other comments or questions?
No further comments.
Okay, very good. Any other questions or comments from the city council?
So yeah,
Okay.
compliment on the fact that this week things seem to have gone much more smoothly. I love the way that this is coming together on the online pieces coming together. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Now, the city manager said that our next meeting was proposed for April 13th. The agenda that I have shows that it's April 27th. Are we still planning on having a special meeting on April 13th?
So, Honorable Mayor, we're both right. The agenda is talking about your next regularly scheduled regular meeting that we are proposing. We would propose to have one special meeting in between that will have more regular business items as well as an update. And we'll also include some of the confirmation and ordinances that would follow on from the proclamations that I have made as your emergency operations director. So while our next regular meeting, we still expect to be on April 27th. And at this point, it's very, very likely that that will be a virtual meeting too. We would plan on having a virtual meeting that would be a special meeting on the 13th of April with the council's permission.
And that would also be at 5 o'clock?
Yes, I think at this point, let's, at least for the special meetings, let's keep that time so that people can get a sense of prediction of when we're actually having these meetings.
Okay, so
Before we adjourn, I believe we forgot something. Don't we have to ratify the emergency, the proclamation?
You are correct, and there's a couple of those which will be coming back to you on the 13th. The one related to evictions and the one related to fines. Both of those would either be ratified or an ordinance following along after that.
okay, well, very good. So with that, there being no further business, we will adjourn to a special meeting at 5 o'clock on April 13th, and that will also be a remote meeting. So with that, meeting adjourned.